So the frontal plane or the coronal plane goes this way. Remember, if your arms follow the coronal plane all the way up, you end up at the corona, the crown of the head, right? So I like to remember it that way. So it's the coronal plane, which contains abduction and adduction. Please say those along with me and be moving your limbs. Abduction. Yeah, abduction. And then adduction. That's why you have to say AB and AD, because there's going to be a point where you're not clear. And the only way to be clear is to break it down like that. Abduction and adduction. And then for the head and neck, it's side flexion or lateral flexion in the frontal or coronal plane. Also side flexion through the trunk or through the spine. And then for the lower body in the frontal plane, doing AB and adduction, let's switch to the sagittal plane. So the sagittal plane is going this way, right? So that's hip flexion and then hip extension. Also flexion and extension of the knee. Sagittal plane would also be plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. Or the hip joint, your good old deadlift or hip hinge would be sagittal plane movement. And then through the spine, sagittal plane movement would look like flexion of the spine, extension of the spine. For the shoulder, it's flexion of the shoulder and extension of the shoulder. Remember that this is neutral. For the shoulder, this is neutral. So even though I'm, and right now I'm flexing, right? And if I start to bring my arm back towards neutral, I'm coming out of flexion, moving towards extension. But I also like to call this extension, because if I call this, reverse flexion or something like that, it doesn't tell me specifically what muscles are involved. If I know that I'm moving my arm down this way, I know that these muscles in the front are moving eccentrically and these muscles in the back are moving concentrically, because that's what happens in extension. So get used to thinking about the arm somewhere in the arc of flexion, moving towards extension or starting to move into extension as you move down toward neutral, even though you're not from neutral into the extension zone yet, because it'll clarify which muscles are moving in what way. Okay, and then flexion and extension of neck would look like this. Also flexion and extension of the elbow, flexion and extension of the wrist. So that's the frontal plane and the sagittal plane. Next is the horizontal and the transverse planes, right? So horizontal or transverse plane looks like this at the neck. So that's rotation. It's horizontal abduction, horizontal adduction at the shoulder, or horizontal cross flexion. It's called cross flexion. It's also called through the spine. That would look like rotation through any segment of the spine. Segment is, L5, L4, L3, L2, etc., on up to C2, C1. Those are all segments. So any segment of the spine turning this way would be rotation. I also consider external rotation and internal rotation to be transverse plane movements. I don't think they're going to ask you that. I think it's interesting to think about, and that's it. Okay, so that's, believe it or not, that's it for the planes. I hope you guys were moving through all those. People miss, the reason I say, hey, believe it or not, we're all done with the planes, is because people miss a lot of questions about the planes. So I hope that that's not you.